G'day Eagles fans, welcome back to True Eagle. Today I thought I would take the opportunity to have a little bit of a look ahead at what the end of the season might look like and what we might do in terms of our overall list strategy and how we're going to attack the draft this year. What kind of players are we looking for? Are there any trade targets? Are we going to lose any players? And how many list cuts do we actually need to make? And in doing this, it sort of confirmed the suspicion I had. We've got some tough decisions to make as a football club. Which seems odd when you're a team that's won one game all year. You'd off the bat kind of assume it would be easy to cut players, but nonetheless, I think there's a fair bit to discuss in this particular video. Before I get into all of that, I do want to point out that I will be live streaming North Melbourne versus West Coast on the True Footy YouTube channel. I am now part of a weekly show with Dylan and Druzy here in Melbourne, where we live stream 1 or 2 games a week, and this week it's North versus West Coast. I'm very excited about it, so if you're an Eagles fan who wants someone to watch along the game with, there'll be myself, a West Coast fan, there'll be Dylan Alexander, who is a North Melbourne fan, and Druzy will be there to mediate as a Dockers fan. So it'll be a pretty interesting environment, but I'm looking forward to it. So make sure you're there if you want to be. But all right, let's have a little early look at what we might do this off-season and the sort of decisions we need to make. The landscape of it is it's a relatively, I wouldn't say strong draft, but it's reasonable in terms of its quality. Maybe not so compelling at the top end like 2023 was. Maybe a bit more similar to last year. Doesn't have the same depth in terms of how many draftable kids there are. And there are a lot of club-tied players, which is probably going to be something we consider with our strategy as well. Players that are academy or father-son. For the first time, it feels like in ever, we've got a handful of those decisions to make as well. We've got a father-son ourselves, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video, and some decent next-generation academy talents. What this draft also has is a number of good West Australian talents, which, is going to be attractive to us, no doubt. And we've also got a great draft hand because, we're currently bottom of the ladder. I'm hoping with North Melbourne versus West Coast tomorrow, we're not so locked into the wooden spoon as it feels right now. That's going to be a crucial game for deciding where we finish. But we can sort of assume we might have pick 1 at this stage. If Oscar Allen leaves, we might have pick 1 and 2 in the draft. We have Hawthorn's first rounder as well. So there's a fair bit to play with here, and it's a really important one for us to get right naturally. So we currently hold picks 1 and 13 courtesy of Hawthorn. That's tied to their current ladder positions, but obviously, we're in the middle of bye rounds. We're actually in the middle of a round as I'm talking now, so let's just assume it's ballpark pick 13, but that could become 1, 2, and 14, obviously, if Oscar Allen leaves and we get band 1 compensation. So past that, there's probably 20, 32, and 50 that we're going to approximately hold as well. So some really good selections, and like I said, a lot of WA talent. So we're going to need to start thinking through what this looks like, and also, do we have enough list spots to make this possible? So what I've done is gone ahead and I've listed a few players that are almost certainly not going to get a contract next year, or at least right in the gun to be delisted. And then we can work back how many picks can we actually take if we've got 3 academy players and a father-son. So let's go through it. I think Dom Sheed is certainly not going to be on West Coast list next year. Oscar Allen is a maybe. I'm going to put a question mark there. Obviously, if we don't lose Oscar Allen, we don't hold pick 2 anyway. So he's sort of aligned with pick 2 on this little chart I've made up here. Callum Jamison's got to be a Monty to be delisted, has barely played and just keeps getting injured, unfortunately for him. And Jack Petruccelli, I think if you're 26 years old and playing in the Waffle and not getting a game, you're pretty much locked in to get delisted. So I'm pretty confident we won't see these boys in Eagles colours next year. But past that, I think we've got some interesting decisions to make. As you can see there, I've only made 3 main list delistings there, and that gives us 1, 14, and 20 as usable picks. So who else do we need to cut? As a side note, we know that Harley Reid is going to be targeted. He is being targeted right now. At this current stage in time, I'm not super concerned that it's likely he goes this year, but of course he may do. But I feel like we've done enough of that chat, so let's just assume for now we've got Harley for at least 2026. I do kind of anticipate Jack Williams might fetch some interest from other clubs. As I recall this, he's currently in the team, but has spent a little bit of time outside it. I wouldn't be surprised if another club goes sniffing around and Jack is interested by that, but at the moment there's no rumour to suggest that. Now let's get to the glut of players where I think West Coast has got some really tough decisions to make in terms of whether we keep these guys on or do we cut them and allow for that draft pick. So the first one is Jamie Cripps, and I think, okay, he's been injured the last few weeks. He will be back in the side against North Melbourne. He's been a really important player for us this year, and I think what he adds as a leader and as a genuine veteran in this team whose leadership numbers are dwindling, I think he's playing well enough to justify another contract. But when you look at the big picture here, it's pretty easy to make the case that he might be unlucky. I think he wants to play on for one more, but I don't know if we're going to be in a position to accommodate him. And as a Jamie Cripps fan, that makes me a little bit sad. That's just kind of the state of play at the moment. So that's going to be a tough decision. Past that, Tom Cole is out of contract. At the moment, he's pretty established in the team. He could be out of contract at a bad time. Jaden Hunt is in a similar position there. Jaden Hunt, as far as I'm aware, has never been dropped from this West Coast side, and I think will be turning 30 or around about the 30 mark this year. He's going to be out of contract. Is he so important that he gets another contract? I think if we're going to be taking 5 to 6 selections in this year's draft, which we have the collateral to do, again, Jaden Hunt or Tom Cole, maybe not both, will be part of a difficult decision West Coast has to make. Campbell Chester is another one here. Former first-round draft pick. Didn't play in his first year, had a case of the fumbles in his second, played some decent footy without really standing out, has spent most of this year injured, and has come back and played 2 Waffle games that were okay. The first one was pretty decent, and then I just watched West Coast versus Perth then, and not a great game from anyone really, other than maybe Clay Hall. But I think we're at the point now with Campbell. He has about 6 months to prove that he's got a future in the AFL. In fact, it's more like 3 months. But I would say he's right in the gun for being looked at as a potential delistee. So some really tough decisions to make there. And another one I'll throw in there is Harry Barnett. He seems to be really struggling at Waffle level from what I've read, and he is actually not out of contract this year. So we have done it in the past. We've delisted a player with a year to run on their contract, and it just means we still pay them under the salary cap for next year. So I think that's possible, and it remains another big decision. How many rucks are we willing to delist? Are we willing to delist Harry Barnett, Callum Jamieson, if you can call him a ruck at the moment, and then what do we do with Cohen Livingston, who's been on the list for a couple of years now? You'd imagine one of that 3 will survive for sure. There's some other players I'd probably look at re-signing at this point. Rhett Bazos had some bad luck with injury, but I think has put forward some compelling form in the Waffle, and you probably give him a little bit more leeway being a key position player. And we also need some depth and talent in the key back stakes as well. So I would say Rhett Bazo and Sandy Brock, who are both out of contract as it stands, probably players I would rather see signed than some of the players I've mentioned before that. There will be a decision to make on Jacob Newton. He was our second mid-season draft selection, and he is, as far as I'm aware, on a 6-month contract. So he'll be on the rookie list. He won't be on the main list, but nonetheless a player worth mentioning there. Malachi Champion, whether he gets another year or not, I'm not sure. He looks fairly good at Waffle level, but he's very small. Tom McCarthy signed an 18-month deal, again on the rookie list, so he won't be delisted. FootyWire has Tyler Brockman out of contract, but I'm led to believe he is still contracted for another year. Either way, probably safe, I would have thought, for at least an extension if he is indeed out of contract and not likely to be delisted. So at this point of the video, guys, let me know in the comments, who would you keep and who would you delist? You know, I wouldn't like to see us go into a draft that is strong for WA talent, where we have a great hand and we leave the draft too early, unless we're trading some of those picks into the future. But as it currently stands, 5-6 picks is the minimum I want. So let me know in the comments, who do you think should go out of the players we've just discussed? What about trade targets? This is another interesting one. Chad Warner was obviously a big target for us going into this year and re-signed with the Sydney Swans. That's fine. We'll deal with that in 2 years. Hopefully we get him as a free agent, and then that would probably be a net positive, all things considered. So past that, I've seen some links to Will Phillips at North Melbourne. We know we've been interested in Devon Robertson in previous times. And Angus Sheldrick, I don't think we've been linked to, but fits the mould there. So all 3 of those players are sort of nuggety inside mids who are mature, that can't quite crack a game at their current clubs, that add something to West Coast that we do lack. We do lack some grunt, we lack some maturity in that midfield. I don't know if any of those are alluring enough for me to want to use a valuable list spot on for a player that may not actually improve us so much. There has been a link to Darcy Cameron. I'm not too sure exactly how strong this is. This has been reported in established media outlets. It's not just big footy talk or whatever. Again, it comes down to cost. He's in pretty good form. Even if he wants to come back and play in WA, he's obviously a big improvement on guys like Matty Flynn or Bailey Williams, with all due respect to them. There's no doubt about that, but he is 31 this year, if I'm not mistaken, born in 94, Darcy Cameron, so it really would be a short-term move. And again, these spots are more valuable than you think they would be. So as an aside, I've talked about priority picks for West Coast in the past, but I suppose the terminology I probably should have been using was assistance package. You know, I don't think West Coast should be campaigning for a first round draft pick because it's just not realistic at this point. But if we are in a position to negotiate some sort of assistance package from the AFL for like 4 years of being diabolical, and at this current point in time we still only have the one win, what I'd be pushing for is an extra list spot or two to help us retain some of this talent. It would help us retain maybe a Jamie Cripps, Tom Cole, but also get an extra NGA talent in, just as an aside. So let me know in the comments what you think of that. The free agency space will be an interesting one to navigate. Again, we talked about how valuable list spots are at the moment, but we do need to bear in mind that if Oscar Allen goes as a free agent, how free agency compensation is evaluated is looking at net in versus net out. So someone like a Brandon Starcevich, I believe, is still out of contract at the Brisbane Lions, West Australian, and is a gun player, and with Hoff moving into the midfield as it currently stands, Starcevich could be valuable in this team. Well, if we sign Starcevich, that will probably negate our compensation for Oscar Allen, so we can probably kiss goodbye to pick 2, in which case that seems like a terrible idea. He's also got some concussion issues as well. Gun player, don't get me wrong, but probably just not the right timing for us. And then finally, a look at a draft strategy and what we might do with what could be picks 1, pick 2, pick 14, 20, 32, and 50, or whatever it is. It's pretty early to go too in the weeds with this, but we can have some high-level discussion. So the pick 1 candidate at the moment, or the favourite, if you will, is Cooper Duff-Tytler from Victoria. A very athletic, you could say unconventional ruckman, sort of in the mould of Luke Jackson. That is the description. I have no idea how you really compare those talents at the same age, but that kind of style of athletic ruckman is the play that Cooper Duff-Tytler is, and he could become a key forward at the next level. Not one of those big, powerful, hulking rucks, but really more your athletic types. Maybe Ethan Reid is another example of that from 2023 to the Gold Coast Suns. So this one, look, it's a tough one because I've been saying, and I know that you guys in the comments agree with me, that rucks are a problem for West Coast. But with pick 1 in particular, using it on a ruck in isolation, I think is fraught with risk. Not totally against it, but perhaps I'd be more comfortable with taking an athletic skinny ruck project from Victoria who's going to take 6 or 7 years to hit his prime anyway. I'd be more comfortable with it if we've also got pick 2 and we can offset that by drafting an actual midfielder, because I'm sure you remember last year me talking about midfielders, and of course we trade pick 3 for a medium-sized defender. But with one of our 2 picks, I would love to see us, have a genuine midfielder as one of those picks. It doesn't have to be both. It does get to a point where you overstack your midfield, particularly if we're discussing like offensively minded and skillful midfielders. We have list gaps, but we do have some offensive punch in the young midfield that we've got there. So Elijah Hewitt and Harley Reid. And I'd imagine at some point we intend to have Chad Warner in this team. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself there, but imagine 3 of those in the same team. If we had another player like that, it's probably getting a little bit overkill. We need some balance. We need midfielders with some class and polish, that is. We need someone who can run all day and accumulate. Those are the skill sets that we are lacking in our midfield as it currently stands. So maybe CDT with pick 1, and if we have pick 2, well, that actually gets a little bit tougher because some of the best midfield talents are club tied in this particular draft. Some of the names I've seen are Dyson Sharp. I don't know if he's considered a realistic top 2 pick at this point. Fred Rodriguez is a player that I do think suits us. He's from South Fremantle. Again, not really considered a top 2 pick at this current point in time. Sam Grill, I like the look of. But all these players are probably not considered genuine top 2 talents. And for me personally, Willem Dersma probably doesn't quite suit what we're looking for. He's a bit more of that rangy, athletic, dynamic player. And again, probably fraught with risk a little bit, in my opinion, in terms of could be an absolute star, could be a bust. So, I mean, let me know in the comments if you're someone who's familiar with someone like Dersma's game. Let me know your thoughts for sure. But I think there's some downsides to approaching that strategy. So, WA talents include Fred Rodriguez, as I just talked about, Cody Curtin, the younger brother of Dan Curtin, who is a key forward at the moment, but can play key back, and I think we could use a key back. I'm almost wondering if we do some shuffling in this first round. It's too early to get really in depth about what that looks like, but I'd almost rather have like 5, 6, 7 rather than picks 1 and 2, or 5, 6, and 12, or whatever. So I think there's going to be some interesting movements around this draft, or perhaps, we draft someone really early at pick 2 that people aren't expecting. As for later in the draft, we do have a number of NGA/father-son prospects. So Charlie Banfield, Western Australia played Vic Country today and apparently had a really good last quarter. But at this point, considered a bit more of a late draft prospect as a taller wingman type. Kobe Evans is injured at the moment, but an inside mid from the Perth Demons, if I'm not mistaken. Again, a later draft prospect at this point. Wes Wally seems to be pretty unanimously rated in the top 20, so I mean, that's good because it implies that he's a good player and he's a small forward and he's skillful and a bit more of a lead-up type as well as a good ground-level player from what I understand. So we'll have a decision to make about where that bid falls. To be honest, generally speaking, like my observations with the draft are if a player's not rated right in that top handful as an academy prospect, they don't tend to get bid on too early. So I feel maybe there's a bit of blind optimism here, but I feel like Wes could be falling down the order simply because he's academy player. That being said, this is also the most compromised draft we've ever seen, so I don't really know. Tyler Williams is another small forward in our NGA, if I'm not mistaken, again considered a later draft prospect at this point. So I suppose the takeaway there is we've got some small forwards on the horizon. We've got 2 this year. We just took Jacob Newton as a mid-season draftee. I mean, he may not be on the list next year. Who knows? It's too early to say, and I've only seen very little of him. But if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a number of small forwards in West Coast NGA for 2026 as well. I want to say that McGlade is one of them. So my point being is, if our NGA is spitting out a fair bit of small forward talent, and I understand that McQualter probably likes those dynamic small players, and it seems to be a league-wide trend at the moment. They're very in vogue, teams having multiple quality smalls. That's great, but that does also inform what we do with the rest of our list strategy, right? So if we've got an academy churning out small forwards, we need to consider that with our other selections. So long story short, potentially a ruckman with pick 1, who knows? A genuine ball-winning midfielder with some class would be ideal. Probably need to go a little bit easy on the small forwards, I would have thought at this current point in time. A key back would be sweet. We really don't need a key forward, but we do finally have a lot of chips to play with in this draft. I feel like there's going to be some maneuvering required, but we're in a fairly good position from that point of view, and it would be made all the easier if the AFL let us have an extra list spot or 2. I really think that would be helpful for us for the position we're in. But let me know, guys, what did you think of this summary of where we're at from a list management point of view? Let me know your opinion, of course, particularly on the guys who may or may not get a chance next year. Make sure you tune into True Footy tomorrow/today, depending on when you see this video, for the North v West Coast live stream. I'll, of course, be back to do a review for that game as well, and I'm really hoping we get the 4 points. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Up the Eagles.